Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast. You're in the right place if you're a growth-seeking being who acknowledges the challenges and delights of your humanity on the path to an ever more conscious life. If you want to feel inspired to love and accept yourself, to feel free to be and express you in all your brilliance, if you want to truly value yourself and others and feel energized and alive both at home and in the world, then sit back and take a breath as you explore and grow the brilliance of your beautiful human self with your host, the father of non-personal awareness and creator of the MPA process, Joel Young.
Hello, and welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. We are at episode number 37. So if you're brand new here, I'm so glad that you found me. I hope you stick around. Do make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to this so you can get notified of when I come on again. And if you're back again, thank you so much. As I always say, I so appreciate that you choose to have me in your earbuds or wherever you're listening, in the car. If you're driving, can we drive yet? Yes, we can, a little bit. So I very much appreciate that it's a real privilege to be to have some of your very precious time spent with me. So today it's a riff day. I'm just going to be riffing with you on the topic that's come to mind. It's been on my mind, and I think I'm just going to, chat to you about this and offer some perspectives and ideas. I've called it pandemic energy. What can we learn? And I think it's really from noticing that there's been a number of phases that we've gone through since, we first found out about the pandemic and all the lockdown stuff. And it really occurs to me that it's kind of a big collective experience. And yet we all kind of experience things individually. And because really the way that I look at things is that in terms of the energetic patterns, it means there can be something in it, whatever our individual experience, that we can learn about ourselves, which will then add to our personal maturity, if you like, and forearm us going forward. So yeah, it really has been an extraordinary time. Certainly in terms of my experience in my lifetime, I've not seen this. I wasn't around. I may look old, but I wasn't here in the war long after. Born in the late 60s, and so grew up in the 70s. But nonetheless, I've really seen nothing like this at all in my lifetime. And when I think about collective experiences, it always makes me think of one of the non-personal principles, that everything is energy. And then when you move on from that, there's an idea which you may or may not have come across, which is really that the stuff of life is at consequence to energy. So the thing that I cite about that is, I don't know if you ever YouTubed or you can look it up on YouTube. There's some great videos. And what they do is they put sand onto a metal plate. Then they attach a tone generator to that metal plate, and then they run the tone through the plate, and then the sand all dances around and creates shapes, forms, right? So again, a tone generator is generating a tone which is an energetic wave. So you can extrapolate this to the bigger principle that, in a way, that the energy, the waves of energy that are coming through compel form. Now, of course, life itself isn't quite as simple as a bucket of sand on a large metal plate with a tone generator. Because what happens is, if you change the tone, if you make the frequency higher, then the sand all jiggles around, and creates a new form. And I often say that in the grain of sand's world, it suddenly gets, the tone generator shifts, and it goes, oh, I've got a great idea. I need to go over there. And takes personal responsibility for its initiative, when in fact it's really just responding to energy. So in a way, looking at the whole pandemic thing in terms of there are energy waves that are coming through the collective consciousness. And then, we're all kind of responding in different ways. Obviously, there's a lot of similarities, but there's also, of course, a very individual experience of it. And that may seem a bit weird if you think about it in terms of, well, if all the form is a consequence to the energy, then how come there's so much diversity? Well, that's the beauty of nature. It's the wonder of nature. In the same way that we all have our own individual, the stuff of us has our own individual resonance, and in the stuff of us, I'm including the filters that are the ideations, the mental ideas, the emotions. It all kind of works together to create a result. In the same way that you can shine light through a prism and it will split into different colors. It's the same principle, really. The light is the light. It's white light, but it refracts through the prism into different colors. The energy is the energy, and there's a big wave of energy, which is refracted into what we experience as this pandemic wave, or the waves within the pandemic. And then that splits through into our individual expression of it. So I know I'm being quite meta here. I hope you're staying with me. As I say, completely riffing on it. So again, and that shows up that sense of difference. It's the same energy. So, if you think about who you are, who am I? The classic question. Well, the answer to that may seem very simple. I'm the vast, boundless. I am nothing. I am everything. But the truth is, who you are is a collective of things. There's many different aspects of you, but you tend to think in terms of, oh, this is just me, right? So within that, and then you've got there's all the mind aspects, the different facets of you, the different states of you throughout the day or throughout a year. Then there's your body. Even your body expresses this, it's one body, and yet there are many differences. There's fingers, completely different function and shape compared to, say, arms or legs. Then there's organs and your blood cells. There's so many different aspects, but it comes under the one banner of you. So I'm using these things really because it's like I'm saying to you that there is a collective consciousness that is happening. We're all experiencing the same energy, but there are individual expressions of that come up. Now, why does a part of the body become a finger and a part of the body become a leg? Well, I guess it's purpose, right? It's, if a finger tried to be a leg, we wouldn't get very far. So one of the things that I love to sort of suggest to people is when they discover their own expressions is to know that is your purpose. You're here to, even if it looks like it's your stuff, right? It's like, that's like my finger, I could say, has an issue with holding up my entire body. Oh dear, you need to go and do some process work. But it's not born to do that. It doesn't exist to do that, my leg would have a hard time, typing on the keyboard. Oh my dear, it's got a terrible issue. You used to sort out that rubbish. Get enlightened about it or something. But it doesn't work that way, and we're all like that. We all have our individual responses, some of which can be judged as good, and some of which could be judged as bad. But fundamentally, however you're showing up is your perfect expression within the totality of all of us. So again, in this kind of macro world, there's a wave of energy coming through, which I've called, pandemic energy, if you like. Now, I've got to say that I'm looking at this through my own lens, clearly. I can only go by my own experience, what I'm exposed to. So, I get exposed, especially in the lockdown situation, to my clients, my family, contacts on social media, and what social media shows me. Oh my God. News media, I don't watch very much of that at all, but obviously there's some around. I'm checking in with certain what the guidelines are, that kind of thing, and friends. So that's my experience. I don't really have, I feel very blessed because I know there's been a lot of people who have people they're connected to who've died. I don't have that experience. So most of where I'm looking at this is through the experience of lockdown, because that's been my experience through this pandemic. Nevertheless, I'm going to be looking at it in terms of the sort of waves of patterns and how they've shifted and the qualities of them as they go through. And one of the points that I want to really make here is that even though we're looking through the lens of the pandemic energy and the lockdown energy, where it can be really useful is because generally the waves of energy follow certain patterns, and we can, by seeing how we respond, how we react to these things, gives us insights into our own makeup, and that gives us an opportunity to bring more awareness where where appropriate, and those kind of things. We're going to get into that in a bit, but so I was thinking, how, what's the sort of pattern been as we go through lockdown? So I guess it started off pre-lockdown. You've got to include the pre-lockdown, right? That's what we now call normal. Never used to be called normal. Now that was normal. Could we go back to normal, please? So it's kind of, it's just a phase where we were unconscious of the idea of pandemics, or at least any real sense of what a pandemic would look like, or lockdown. But as it arrived, like suddenly there it is, out of this phase, we go into lockdown. And that brings its own kind of experience. So generally, again, very much generally, for the most part, it instilled a certain amount of panic. It's all that kind of buying of toilet rolls and emptying supermarkets and those kind of things. There was kind of generally across the board a fearful reaction as we went into lockdown. And then the energy shifted as we came into the time of lockdown, the last couple of months, or less the last few weeks, really, where it kind of became a bit more steady. People got used to working from home. They got used to the idea of queuing in supermarkets and the idea of a lot of the shops and things being closed, not being able to travel. So there was a kind of a uneasy steadiness, but it sort of felt kind of stable. And then just a few weeks ago, there was a whiff, a whiff of the emergence from lockdown. And it's interesting that there's kind of a sense of sort of that initial opening, which in a way has come into this new phase that we're experiencing right now, which is sort of a quick acceleration of that into, I guess, what I would call an unraveling, that's going on right now, and all the sort of stuff that's happening on the planet, not just in terms of the lockdown and the people's responses to the loosening of the restrictions, but also, of course, all of the stuff that's happening in the States and around the world, that's kind of revolutionary, the riots and all of the stuff that's going on around that. So if we look at that sort of in more essential terms, you could say that the pre-lockdown, that normal, is kind of a stasis phase. So there's kind of we're just going along as normal. Then when we hit lockdown, that's like a contraction phase. So we go from stasis to contraction. In the contraction, we move into that steady lockdown phase, which is like a holding on energy. In that holding on energy, just kind of holding on, I don't know if you felt this, I certainly did, but that you can feel the tension slowly building. We're all okay, but the sort of people would express it as kind of lockdown fatigue, and I noticed in this country and certainly around here that the restrictions, when everyone behaved themselves, yes, we've got to be good and respond. And then more and more people would sort of emerge before the rules broke down. It kind of, the tension was building because we were building up to that cracking moment as the emergent began, and the sort of whole idea of lockdown, it's like the bud cracked at that moment. And then in the acceleration, again, that's where we're seeing this sort of chaos phase of suddenly everything seems to be unraveling. And we're very much in that sort of revolution phase that's going on. That's what we're seeing with the protests and everything that are going on in the States and again around the world. So if you look at that and go, well, who knows what's going on? Who knows what's happening? If you look at it, that's a fairly standard sort of creative path, really. Nature does this all the time. And I say that because, often the thing that comes up is, well, what's going to happen next? Oh no, what's going to happen next? Well, if you put it in the category of, stasis, contraction, building tension, cracking open, all that kind of stuff, you see that a flower does that all the time. And you see that, a caterpillar does that all the time. So when we say what's next, we can go and, well, let's look at the caterpillar path or the butterfly path. Starts off as a young pupae, and it's greedy, hungry, and it just eats. That's all it does. Eats and grows, consumes and eats and grows until suddenly nature decides, hang on, something's got to change. And the shutdown happens and it becomes a chrysalis. Inside the chrysalis, it looks like not much is happening, but there's all sorts of meltdown happening inside, to the point where something new forms, but it's still held inside the chrysalis. and then it cracks open the pupae, right, the outer shell of the chrysalis, and then it's very quick from there to where it breaks out suddenly this completely new thing. It's like a revolution, right? Emerges from the chrysalis. So if we're looking ahead and going, okay, so what's going to happen going forward? Well, let's follow that path through. Well, an often forgotten phase in the butterfly life cycle is once the butterfly emerges, it doesn't just immediately fly off. It's actually very vulnerable. Its wings are still soft. It definitely can't fly yet. And what it needs to do is to just sit there, soak up the sun's rays, and allow things to solidify. So in a sense, we could say that if we look ahead, then the next phase is going to be probably very vulnerable, and waiting for whatever it is that's just come out of this chrysalis to solidify into something that can start to move and discover what it is, which is the next phase where the butterfly finally takes flight. And it's only really then that the butterfly discovers what it is, right? It's like, oh my God, these wings are great. And then it starts to get out into the world in a whole new way, completely different to how it was when it was a caterpillar. And goes into the whole wonders of, finding nectar, mating, and all that stuff, and having its bloomed life in that way. So in a way, that's if we look at so what's to come, it's kind of looking like, there's going to be some tricky times as we come out of this chrysalis. It can be chaotic, it can be dangerous, it can be magical and magnificent if you have eyes to see that. Even in the chaos, there's a certain beauty to it. I don't know if you've ever actually seen a butterfly or a dragonfly coming out of its chrysalis, but it's the most miraculous thing to witness. And then again, that sitting still and being vulnerable is something that maybe we're going to be better at. Our culture in the last 100 years has not been really one good for stopping and just being still. But again, nature's in charge. So I see that as a potential phase coming up of just really sitting still with, the outcome of the emergence and seeing what and who we have become before we can do something with it, which is the flight. So that's my big picture, if you like. That's my musings. But I want to bring it into so how can we bring that back to us? What can we learn from it? How can we look at it in a way which gives us something in a very practical, local level that we can do with it that's useful in terms of our own personal growth and becoming a more brilliant human? So let's have a look at that then. So how can we make the best use of this idea, if you like, or way of looking at things in terms of our own sort of maturing, our own growth? Again, you're a growth-seeking being if you're here. That's what I say. The people listening to this are growth-seeking beings. I hope you are. But how can we apply this in this way? Well, I think the way that I look at things often is how do I relate to something? So how do you relate to this cycle? I think looking at it in terms of it following a model which is a sort of a cycle of growth anyway, gives us some reassurance about where things are heading. Even if it looks very different on the outside, we can say, well, I understand that there's a knowable process happening, just like it is with the butterfly. But then as you come back into the more local experience, it's like, well, how do I relate to this cycle? What are my patterns in response to that pattern? So, you say, what are your local experiences of those particular energies? Now, obviously, I've described it in the way that I've experienced it. But if we come into the basic idea of, stasis, contraction, holding on, building tension, cracking open, chaos and revolution, becoming, the vulnerability of that, solidification of that, and then flight. Well, let's look at it first of all in terms of how you can look at it as how have I been responding during this pandemic? So let's go into the into lockdown well, let's start with the status, actually. I mean, maybe you can look back and go, within the status, I was maybe agitated, or maybe I was just oblivious. That gives you an idea of how you respond in general to stasis. And then as we came into the contraction of the lockdown initially, again, were you in the camp of the fear reaction? Was it more the uncertainty? Were you kind of blasé or okay about that? Again, just to give you a sense of yourself, a sense of your read on how you respond to that part of the energy. And then as the lockdown became sort of full on, again, do you find yourself going more into the obedience or the rebellion? I actually did an episode. If you check out episode 29, which is, what's your authority response? It's a good episode to sort of look at that particular phase. Do you rebel? Do you go into obedience, or somewhere in between? Did you do it with gritted teeth? And again, just look at what are the flavor, what are the issues that came up in each of these phases? What were the fears that came up? What were the bits that were easier for you? What were the bits that were harder for you? What were your breakthroughs? What were your reactions? As we came into the emergence, how did that look for you? Did it come more in the kind of complacency about it? Was there relief? Was there mistrust? More uncertainty, but maybe of a different kind to what was happening when we went into lockdown. And again, if mistrust is one of those things that comes up for you, the episode 28 actually is called "Who Can You Trust?" Another great episode that I'll put in the show notes today as well. And then right now, what's happening for you as we go into this phase, which is the chaos revolution phase? Are you feeling anger? Are you feeling fear? Are you feeling like you want to either focus on it to make a difference or focus away from it? Either because you want to put your head in the sand, or because you have beliefs around focusing on the positive. Whatever the story is, it doesn't matter. There's no judgment around it. Again, this is just an opportunity to look at the different phases of what's happened and get a sense of how you respond to that. And then you can sort of look at it and go, well, I recognize these patterns. I would bet that if you looked throughout your life, you could find this general pattern of stasis, contraction, holding on, cracking open, revolution, something new, and then opening into the full blossom in different areas of your life. So maybe you've been through this kind of cycle before. You can look down your history, and then if you look at your responses, if you sort of just pick one that's going on, maybe it's a relationship issue you went through, maybe there was an illness that you experienced, maybe there's many different life things where you can see this pattern at play. And if you take one and look at it really clearly and break it down and go, okay, that was the stasis phase, that was the contraction phase, okay, and that was the holding on, that's where it cracked, and that's where it accelerated, and a lot of things happened there, and that's where it all kind of came to a sort of a halt, and nobody really knew what was going on. And that's when it opened and everything became clear. And if you break that down and look at how did you respond to each of those phases, I'm going to guess that you'll be able to find correlations between that historic experience there and then what you've been going through during these phases in the pandemic energy and the different lockdown. And the usefulness of that is, how you met those phases of the energy shift historically and in the lockdown so far will give you insight. It will help you to understand and become aware of the patterns. And, in a way, when you know your pattern, you can know your solution. And it's not just about saying, I need to be better here or better there. That can be useful. It's very useful to know where you could use more consciousness, because you might notice, there's a phase here where I definitely I'm much less conscious in that phase, so it'd be useful. It's a useful thing to do. Okay, how can I bring more consciousness to that phase? And to ask yourself, what's working for me? There may be things in the way that you meet that cycle that just work really well, but there may be things you spot as you look at sort of a historic example of it, and then throughout lockdown, where you go, well, that really was rubbish. That would be a really useful insight, right? Every time I hit the beginning of that contraction phase, I just go off the rails, so you can go, oh, cool, that's really interesting to see, because it's not really about the lockdown or the pandemic. It's just how you respond to that energy. And if you can, do some work so that can the beginning of that contraction phase, if that's where the issue comes up, can be a lot smoother and kinder to you. So again, it's an invitation here really to look at how you can see this in terms of the patterns, and therefore notice where you can literally help yourself. With all the tools. I mean, anywhere in this phase where you find an issue, you can use MPA just to really work through and smooth things over. You can again get access to the unconditional pivot exercise, especially with this stuff going on right now that you consider a sucky situation. And again, the training for the unconditional pivot exercise is episode 27. I'll also put that one in the show notes for today. And then again, the last piece of the equation, looking at now, as you go historically and look back at, how you're responding to the pattern historically when you see that cycle, and how you've been responding now. As we go ahead, you can look at, okay, so that gives me a clearer path of not how it's going to look as we go forward, but certainly what the energy is and how I tend to respond to it. So as I look ahead and say, well, right now we're in the middle of the chaos revolution phase. So yes, I can look at that. But at some point as we go forward, that is going to shift, because it's its nature to shift, to move forward. We're going to open into that sense of vulnerability and solidification. So how have I dealt with that in the past? Can I look at it and go, okay, so there's ways I've dealt with that in a way that really is unkind to me, or are there ways that really work? And then you can be mindful of that as we start to notice the world shifting into that phase. Again, you can come in awareness and consciousness to how you deal with that. So really, hopefully, I hope that this gives you a sense of a lens. I wanted to give you today was a lens to look at this whole thing through, that will give you the opportunity to become more conscious about how you respond to patterns, and certainly the pattern of change in general, so that you can put things in place within your own mind, and also in terms of action, how you can serve yourself, so that not only now, as this is probably the most intense phase of any creation phase, the chaos phase, is a bit like the episode I did on the dark night of the soul, which again, I'm going to put that one in the in the show notes now. Can't remember the number of that offhand, but I will put it in the show notes. The dark night of the soul, which is again in a way a mirror of this, because there's a phase, a series of phases, and the dark night itself, which is a bit like the chaos phase we're experiencing now, is the toughest bit, and sometimes there's nothing you can do. So there's a sort of invitation to surrender. Anyway, so as I say, I hope that this has given you some pause for thought, something to reflect on. I'm not asking necessarily for your agreement. In fact, if you have a different opinion about what's going on, just please go ahead and just let me know. There'll always be a post that says new episode out on the MPA Rocks page on Facebook, which is a great way to comment on social media. And I'm always open to getting your voice messages. If you go to the Be a Brilliant Human website, which is www.beabrillianthuman.com, there's a button there that says leave me a message, and you can leave me a voice message. Let me know there, or send me an email, joel@nonpersonalawareness.com. And I'd love to know your thoughts, and let me know if this has inspired you or been thought-provoking for you, or given you some insight that you can make use of. And yeah, I think I'm done. I think I've riffed myself to a natural conclusion. There we go. Brilliant. Well, I hope you're keeping well wherever you are. Have an amazing week. I'll be back next Tuesday. Make sure you remember to hit that subscribe button. If you like what you've heard today, go tell someone about it. Say, oh, there's this great podcast called Be a Brilliant Human. Go look it up. And let's get them on board. I'd love you to do that. And of course, you can always, if this is raising issues for you, you can come and check out my one-to-one sessions. Just need to go to joelyoungmpa.com/sessions. And I've mentioned briefly MPA here. So you can download the MPA process for free, which is a great tool to help you navigate through tricky territory. And you'll again find that on the beabrillianthuman.com website or the joelyoungmpa.com website. Show notes for today will be, as ever, beabrillianthuman.com/37. That's it. I'm complete. All that remains, as ever, is to cue the moo.